Please, don't hit us. We are already hurt." Two little girls, no older than 7, huddled together in the snow, their tiny bodies trembling as they clung to each other, whispering through chattering teeth. Their wide eyes shimmered with fear as they looked up at the tall figure looming above them. For a heartbeat, the man said nothing, stunned by the sight before him. Twin girls, alone, barefoot, in worn sandals, on Christmas Eve. Who could abandon 2 children like this, alone, in the freezing dark? And why tonight, of all nights? Before we get into the story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories reach. Christmas was supposed to be a season of joy and laughter, but for 36-year-old Charles, it had become a harsh reminder of how far life had pushed him to the edge. 2 jobs, endless bills, and the weight of exhaustion pressed on him every day. The only reason he kept going was his little boy Noah, his light in the darkness. That night, a biting wind swept through the streets as Charles pulled his thin coat tighter, leaving the diner after yet another extra shift. He hurried toward the bus stop, head down, when something unusual caught his eye near the alley. At first it looked like a heap of discarded clothes, but then a faint whimper. His breath froze. He stepped closer. 2 little girls, no older than 7, were huddled together against the cold wall. Their lips were blue, their tiny bodies shaking, their shoes worn thin. Charles's heart hammered against his chest as he stared at the 2 small figures pressed against the brick wall. The wind howled through the alley, carrying with it the sting of snow that had just begun to fall. The girls' eyes were wide with terror, reflecting the dim glow of the streetlight like trapped animals. "Hey," he whispered, crouching down slowly so he wouldn't frighten them further. "Are you okay?" The girls flinched, pulling each other closer. Their arms wrapped around one another in a protective embrace that made Charles's throat tighten. "Please don't hurt us. We'll do whatever you want," they whispered through chattering teeth, their voices shaking with fear. Charles's heart sunk. He could see the fear in their eyes, and he knew he had to do something to reassure them that they were safe. "Hurt you?" he said calmly. "No, never. I'm not here to harm you. Just let me keep you warm tonight." He continued, keeping his voice soft. "My name's Charles. I just want to help." One of the girls whispered something he couldn't make out. The other buried her face in her sister's shoulder, her tiny body trembling violently. Charles could see their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Their clothes were thin, inadequate for this weather, and their shoes had holes that let the cold seep through to their small feet. The sight hit him like a physical blow. He thought of his own son, Noah, safe and warm in their small apartment just a few blocks away. The thought of his boy in this condition made his stomach twist. Without hesitation, Charles shrugged off his coat and draped it over their small shoulders. The girls stiffened at first, but then one of them leaned into the warmth, her eyes closing briefly as if savoring the feeling of safety. "Come on," he urged gently, extending his hand. "Let's get you somewhere warm. My apartment isn't far. You'll be safe there." The twins looked at each other, having what seemed like a silent conversation. After a long moment, they nodded ever so slightly. Their tiny fingers slipped into his hand, trembling but trusting. Charles had no idea that the choice he had just made would change everything. As they walked through the quiet streets, Charles's mind raced. What was he doing? He could barely afford to feed himself and Noah, let alone 2 more children. But every time he glanced down at their small faces, pale and drawn with exhaustion, he knew he couldn't have left them there. The memory came to him unbidden as they climbed the stairs to his apartment. Another Christmas Eve, 30 years ago. 2 boys, just as scared, just as alone, standing in a similar hallway. But that time, it had been him and his twin brother James being separated and sent to different foster homes after their parents died in a car accident. Charles shook the memory away. Not tonight. Tonight was about these girls. Noah was waiting at the window when they arrived, his face lighting up as always when he saw his father return.
But his expression quickly changed to curiosity when he noticed the two shivering girls beside Charles. "Dad?" Noah's voice was filled with innocent wonder. "Who are they?" "These are—" He looked down at the girls, realizing he didn't even know their names yet. "These are our guests for tonight. They need somewhere warm to stay." Noah, only 8 years old, but wise beyond his years from their circumstances, simply nodded and stepped aside to let them in. The warmth of the apartment seemed to revive the girls slightly, though they still clung to each other. Charles knelt in front of them, his voice gentle as he helped them out of their wet shoes. "You're safe here," he said softly. "No one's going to hurt you. Let me get you something warm to eat."
He moved to the small kitchenette and reheated the pot of soup he'd made earlier, a simple vegetable broth with whatever he could afford. As the soup warmed, he glanced back at the girls. They sat on the edge of his old couch, their eyes darting around the modest apartment nervously. Charles placed 2 steaming bowls on the small table and gestured for them to come over. They hesitated, looking at each other again with that silent communication that only twins seem to share. Finally, they approached the table and took timid sips. The way they ate after that first taste broke his heart. They consumed the soup quickly, desperately, as if they hadn't had a decent meal in days, which Charles realized with growing horror they probably hadn't. When the bowls were empty, Charles sat across from them, his voice gentle but curious. "Can you tell me your names?" The older of the two, or at least the one who seemed to take the lead, spoke first. Her voice was fragile but clear. "Maya," she said, pointing to herself. Then she gestured to her sister. "And this is Anna." "Maya and Anna," Charles repeated with a warm smile. "Those are beautiful names. I'm Charles, and this is my son Noah." The girls didn't smile back. Their eyes continued to dart around the room as if expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment.
"Maya," Charles said carefully, "can you tell me how you ended up out there? Where are your parents?" Maya's face immediately clouded over. She looked at Anna, who had started to tremble again. We ran away," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. "From where, sweetheart?" "From Sandra. She's not our real mom. She's our stepmom." Charles felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. "Why did you run away?" Maya's lower lip quivered. "Because she makes us go out and ask people for money, and if we don't bring back enough, she hurts us." The words hit Charles like a sledgehammer. He glanced at Noah, who was listening with wide, horrified eyes. "We tried to go back tonight," Anna spoke for the first time, her voice even smaller than her sister's. "But she said we couldn't come in because we didn't have any money. She said we could freeze for all she cared." Charles felt something burning in his chest, a rage so pure and fierce that he had to take a deep breath to keep his voice steady. "Well, you're not going to freeze. Not tonight, not ever, if I have anything to say about it." As the girls settled on the couch with blankets Charles had pulled from his bedroom, his mind wandered back to that Christmas Eve 30 years ago. He and James had been 8, the same age as Noah was now.
Their foster placements had been on opposite sides of the city, and despite promises that they'd be able to see each other, those visits became fewer and farther between. James had ended up in a home where the foster father was more interested in the monthly check than the children. Charles had been luckier. His placement had been with a kind but overwhelmed single woman who did her best with limited resources. They'd lost touch completely by the time they were teenagers. Charles had searched for his brother for years, making phone calls, checking records, anything he could think of. When he finally found information about James, it was too late. His twin had died at 23 from a drug overdose, alone in a cheap motel room. The guilt had eaten at Charles for years. If they hadn't been separated, if he'd found him sooner, if he'd tried harder. Looking at Maya and Anna now, curled up together even in sleep, He made a silent vow. No matter what it took, no matter how hard it got, these girls would not be separated, and they would never go back to the hell they had come from. Not on his watch. Charles woke the next morning to the sound of soft voices in the living room. He found Noah sitting on the floor with Maya and Anna, showing them his small collection of toys. A few action figures, some building blocks, and the toy car Charles had wrapped for him. "This was supposed to be my Christmas present," Noah was saying, holding up the unwrapped car. "But I think you should have it instead. You probably haven't gotten any presents in a long time." Maya stared at the toy car, her eyes filling with tears. We can't take your present." "It's okay," Noah said with the simple generosity that only children possessed. "My dad will get me another one someday. Besides, it's more fun when there's someone to play with." Charles felt his throat tighten as he watched Anna reach out tentatively to touch the car. When was the last time these girls had been given anything? When was the last time someone had shown them kindness without expecting something in return?
That's when Maya began to cry. Not the frightened whimpers from the night before, but deep, grateful sobs that seemed to release months of pent-up fear and pain. Charles moved to the couch and pulled her close, and to his surprise, she didn't resist. Anna quickly joined them, and for the first time since he'd found them, both girls truly relaxed. "We want to stay here," Maya whispered against his shoulder. "Please don't make us go back." "I won't," Charles promised, even though he had no idea how he was going to keep that promise. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." If you've ever wondered what you do when faced with an impossible choice, this story will show you that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards. Keep watching to see how Charles's decision changed not just his life, but the lives of two little girls who had given up hope. 3 days later, Charles's small world exploded. He was preparing breakfast when a loud, aggressive knock echoed through the apartment. The girls immediately froze, their faces going white with terror. "She found us," Anna whispered, grabbing Maya's hand. Charles moved to the door cautiously. "Who is it?" "Open this door right now or I'm calling the police," a woman's voice shrieked from the other side. "I know you have my girls in there." Charles looked back at Maya and Anna, who were now trembling violently. Noah had moved protectively closer to them, his young face set with determination. "Stay here," Charles told them quietly. "Then open the door." The woman standing in his hallway was nothing like what he'd expected. Sandra was thin to the point of being gaunt, her skin pale and marked with the telltale signs of drug use. Her eyes were wild, darting, and filled with a desperate kind of fury. "Where are they?" she demanded, trying to push past him into the apartment. Charles blocked her path. "I think you need to calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. You kidnapped my children. Give them back right now, or I swear I'll have you arrested." "Those girls were freezing on the street," Charles said firmly. "They said you refused to let them in." Sandra's laugh was harsh and bitter. "They're lying. Kids lie all the time. Besides, what I do with my children is none of your business." "It became my business when I found them nearly frozen to death." "Look at you," Sandra sneered, looking him up and down with contempt. "You can barely afford this dump you live in. You think you can take care of 2 more kids when you're already failing with your own?" The words stung, because they held a grain of truth. Charles was struggling financially, but looking back at the girls, who were now peeking around the corner with terrified eyes, he knew that money wasn't everything. "Those girls are staying here," he said quietly, "at least until we can figure out what's best for them. What's best for them is coming home with their mother," Sandra spat. "And if you don't hand them over right now, I'm going to make your life hell." "Maya and Anna aren't going anywhere with you," Charles said, his voice growing stronger. "Not until child services can investigate their living situation." Sandra's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I'll be back, and next time I'm bringing the police. We'll see how tough you are then." She turned and stormed down the hallway, leaving Charles standing in the doorway with his heart pounding. That night, After the girls had finally fallen asleep, Charles sat at his small kitchen table with his head in his hands. The reality of his situation was crushing. Sandra was right about one thing: he could barely afford to take care of Noah, let alone 2 more children. But every time he thought about sending Maya and Anna away, he remembered James. He remembered the last conversation he'd had with his twin 5 years after they'd been separated. James had called him drunk, crying, telling him about the foster home where the older kids had bullied him mercilessly and the foster father who'd ignored it all. He'd begged Charles to come get him, but Charles was only 13 himself with no power to help. "I wish we'd never been split up," James had sobbed over the phone. "I wish we could have stayed together." That was the last time they'd spoken. 6 years later, Charles got the call about the overdose. Now, looking at Maya and Anna sleeping peacefully on his couch, Charles knew he couldn't let history repeat itself. These girls had already lost so much. He wouldn't let them lose each other too. But how could he fight someone like Sandra? How could he afford a lawyer? How could he prove that he could provide a better home when he was already stretched so thin? The answer came to him suddenly, and he reached for his phone with shaking hands. Marcus, his old college roommate who'd gone on to become a successful lawyer while Charles had struggled to find stable work.
They hadn't spoken in over a year, but maybe... "Charles?" Marcus's voice was surprised but warm when he answered. "Man, it's been forever. How are you?" "Marcus, I need help," Charles said without preamble. "I'm in a situation I don't know how to handle, and I need a lawyer." He explained everything: finding the girls, Sandra's threats, his determination to keep the twins together and protect them. When he finished, silence stretched on the other end of the line. "Charles," Marcus said finally, "what you're trying to do, it's not going to be easy. Custody cases are expensive, and the system tends to favor biological family, even when that family isn't ideal." "I know," Charles said quietly, "but I can't let them be separated, nor can I let them go back to that woman who made their lives hell. I feel obligated to protect them." "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why is this so important to you?" Charles told him about James, about the foster homes, the separation, the guilt that had haunted him for years. When he finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I'll help you," he said finally. "But I have to be honest. Your financial situation is going to be a problem. Sandra's lawyer is going to argue that you can't provide adequately for 2 more children." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, interviews with social workers, and tense phone calls from Sandra's lawyer. Charles had taken on extra shifts at both his jobs, working 18-hour days to save money for legal fees. He was exhausted, running on coffee and determination, but every time he came home to find Maya and Anna a little more relaxed, a little more willing to smile, he knew he was doing the right thing. The girls were slowly opening up, sharing pieces of their story that made Charles's blood boil. Sandra had been using them to panhandle and sometimes worse, sending them into stores to distract employees while she shoplifted. When they didn't bring back enough money or were caught, the punishments were severe. "She locked us in the closet once for a whole day," Maya had whispered one evening as Charles tucked them in, "because Anna couldn't stop crying when the man at the store yelled at her." "That will never happen again," Charles had promised, fighting to keep his voice steady. "You're safe now." But were they? Every night, Charles lay awake worrying about the upcoming custody hearing. Marcus had been honest about their chances. Sandra had biological rights on her side, and Charles's financial situation made him appear unstable in the eyes of the court. "We need to show that you can provide a better environment," Marcus had explained during one of their meetings. "Better doesn't always mean richer, but it has to mean stable." That's when Marcus had surprised him with an unexpected offer. "There's a position opening up at my firm. It's not lawyer work, it's more like a paralegal and office manager combined, but it pays well, has benefits, and it's regular hours. The problem is they need someone to start immediately, and the custody hearing is next week." Charles had stared at him. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance," Marcus had corrected. "You'd have to prove yourself, but Charles, you're one of the smartest people I know. You just never got the right opportunities." It felt like a miracle, but Charles couldn't shake the feeling that it was too convenient, too perfect. Why now? Why me?
Marcus had smiled, because sometimes the universe has a way of putting the right people in the right place at the right time. And because I've seen what you're willing to sacrifice for those girls. Anyone willing to fight that hard for children who aren't even his own is exactly the kind of person I want working with me. The custody hearing was scheduled for a cold Tuesday morning in January. Charles had barely slept the night before, going over his testimony with Marcus one more time while Maya and Anna watched cartoons with Noah. Remember, Marcus had said, be honest about your struggles, but emphasize what you can provide. Stability, love, commitment to keeping them together. The judge needs to see that you understand the magnitude of what you're taking on. At the courthouse, Charles felt severely underdressed in his one good suit, a cheap one he'd bought years ago for job interviews. Sandra was there with her lawyer, a sharp-dressed man who looked like he charged more per hour than Charles made in a week. May and Anna sat with a social worker in the hallway, looking small and frightened in their matching donated clothes. Charles had wanted to spare them from testifying, but the judge had insisted on hearing from them. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and Charles felt his stomach drop as the judge entered the courtroom. Judge Patricia Hernandez was a stern-looking woman in her 50s, with penetrating dark eyes. She looked over the case file with a frown that didn't bode well for anyone. Sandra's lawyer went first, painting a picture of a mother who had made mistakes but was ready to reform. He glossed over the drug use, framed the neglect as financial hardship, and portrayed Charles as an unstable man who had overstepped his bounds. "Your Honor," the lawyer said smoothly, "while Mr. Hunter's intentions may have been good, he simply doesn't have the resources to care for 2 additional children. My client, despite her past struggles, is the biological guardian and has the right to raise her stepchildren as she sees fit." When it was Marcus's turn, he stood and adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, this case isn't about biological rights or financial resources. It's about what's truly in the best interests of Maya and Anna. Mr. Hunter found these children freezing on Christmas Eve, abandoned by the very person who claims to want them back. In the weeks since, he has provided them with stability, safety, and something they've never had before, the assurance that they won't be separated." Marcus called Charles to the stand first. Under oath, Charles told his story, finding the girls, learning about their situation, and his determination to keep them together. "Mr. Hunter," the judge asked, "you work 2 jobs and care for your own son. How do you plan to adequately provide for 2 more children?" Charles took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I've recently been offered a full-time position with better pay and benefits. But even before that, these girls were eating regular meals, sleeping in warm beds, and going to school every day. Yes, money is tight, but they're not lacking for anything they need. And if I award you custody, what's your long-term plan?" "Adoption," Charles said without hesitation. "I want to adopt both girls so they never have to worry about being separated again." The judge made a note and called Maya to the stand next. Maya looked tiny in the witness chair, her legs dangling as she answered the judge's gentle questions. "Maya, can you tell me about living with Sandra?" Maya's voice was barely audible. "She was always angry, and when she used the bad medicine, she would forget to buy food, or she would hurt us if we did something wrong." "What about living with Mr. Hunter?" For the first time, Maya smiled. "He makes us breakfast every morning, and Noah shares his toys with us, and Charles promised we could stay together forever." When Anna testified, she was even quieter than her sister, but her words carried just as much weight. "I don't want to go back. I want to stay with Charles and Noah. They make us feel safe." Sandra took the stand last, and her testimony was a disaster. She was clearly agitated, possibly under the influence, and her answers were inconsistent and defensive. "Those girls belong with me. I know I made some mistakes, but I can do better. I've been clean for 3 weeks now." "3 weeks?" asked the judge, raising an eyebrow. "Well, mostly clean. Look, nobody's perfect, okay, but they're my responsibility." When Sandra's lawyer asked about her future plans, Her answer made Charles's heart sink. "I'm looking for a bigger place," she said. "And if I need to split them up temporarily to make things work, that's what I'll do. Kids are resilient." The courtroom fell silent. Charles saw Maya and Anna exchange a terrified look from where they sat with the social worker. Judge Hernandez called for a recess to review the case, and Charles found himself pacing the hallway, unable to sit still. "How do you think it went?" he asked Marcus. "Better than expected," Marcus said carefully. Sandra didn't help her case, and the girl's testimony was powerful, but judges are unpredictable in custody cases. When court reconvened, Judge Hernandez looked grave as she prepared to deliver her verdict. "This is a complex case, involving children who have already suffered significant trauma. The court must balance the rights of the biological guardian against the best interests of the children." Charles felt his heart hammering against his ribs. "Ms. Sandra Martinez, while you are the legal guardian of these children, your testimony and history raise serious concerns about your ability to provide a stable, safe environment. Your stated willingness to separate the children, even temporarily, is particularly troubling." Sandra's face flushed red. "You can't do this. They're my kids." "Mr. Hunter," the judge continued, "while your financial situation is not ideal, you have demonstrated a commitment to these children's welfare that goes above and beyond what would normally be expected. Your promise to keep them together weighs heavily in this decision." Charles held his breath. "Therefore, the court awards temporary guardianship of Maya and Anna Martinez to Charles Hunter, with a path towards full adoption pending completion of the necessary procedures and a 6-month evaluation period." The gavel came down, and Charles felt his knees nearly give out with relief. Sandra erupted from her seat. "This is ridiculous. You giving my kids to some stranger who can barely pay his own bills? I'll appeal this. I'll fight this until—" "Miss Martinez," the judge said sternly, "you are welcome to appeal, but I suggest you focus your energy on addressing the issues that led to this decision in the first place." As Sandra stormed out of the courtroom, still ranting, Charles turned to see Maya and Anna running toward him. He caught them both in a hug that lifted them off their feet. "We can stay together?" Maya asked, tears streaming down her face. "Forever," Charles promised, his own voice thick with emotion. "We're a family now." What happens when someone refuses to give up on what's right, even when everything seems impossible? Charles's story shows us that sometimes the greatest victories come from the most unlikely circumstances. 1 year later, Charles stood in the kitchen of their new apartment, a real 2-bedroom place with actual space for the kids to play. The job Marcus had offered him had turned into a career he never could have imagined, using his education in ways that finally felt meaningful. Maya and Anna were at the kitchen table, working on homework, while Noah helped them with math problems. The formal adoption had been finalized 3 months earlier, and both girls now carried the Hunter name.
"Dad," Maya called, and Charles still felt a flutter of emotion every time she said it. "Can we make cookies for the school bake sale?" "Of course," he said, wiping his hands on a dish towel, "but Noah gets to help too." "Obviously," Anna said, rolling her eyes with the perfect attitude of a now 8-year-old. "He's the best at decorating." Charles watched his children, all 3 of them, and marveled at how normal this felt now. There were still challenges, of course. Maya had nightmares sometimes, and Anna was still working with a therapist to process her trauma. But they were healing, growing, becoming the children they were always meant to be. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, Marcus stood there with a bottle of champagne and a grin. "What's the celebration?" Charles asked. "The Peterson case just settled," Marcus said. "The one you helped research? We won big, which means—" He handed Charles an envelope. "Bonus time!" Charles opened the envelope and stared at the check inside. It was more money than he'd made in 6 months at his old jobs combined. "Marcus, this is too much."
Actually, it's not enough, Marcus said seriously. Charles, you've become invaluable to the firm. Your attention to detail, your research skills, your ability to connect with clients who are going through the worst times of their lives, we've never had anyone like you. As if summoned by the praise, Maya appeared at Charles's elbow. Uncle Marcus, she said, throwing her arms around him. Marcus had become a fixture in their lives, and the kids had adopted him as family. Hey, kiddo, how's school? Good. I got an A on my English paper. It was about heroes, and I wrote about Dad. Charles felt his throat tighten. You wrote about me? About how you saved us, Anna said, joining the group with Noah close behind. About how you didn't give up, even when it was hard.
That evening, after Marcus had left and the kids were in bed, Charles found himself standing at the window, looking out at the Christmas lights that decorated the neighborhood. It was exactly 1 year since that night in the alley, the night that had changed everything. He thought about the man he'd been then, exhausted, barely getting by, convinced that he was failing at everything that mattered. He'd been so focused on what he didn't have that he'd almost missed what he could give. Maya appeared beside him in her pajamas, leaning against his arm. "Dad, are you sad?" "No, sweetheart, just thinking." "About what?" Charles smiled, putting his arm around her. "About how sometimes the best things in life come when you're not looking for them." "Like us?" "Exactly like you." Anna and Noah joined them at the window, and they stood there together, watching the snow fall softly outside. "Dad," Noah said thoughtfully, "do you think there are other kids out there who need help like Maya and Anna did?" Charles looked down at his son, amazed by his compassion. "Probably. Maybe we could help them too someday." Charles exchanged a look with Maya and Anna, who both nodded eagerly. "Maybe we could," he agreed. "But right now, let's focus on taking care of our family." "Our family," Maya repeated, as if testing the words. "I like how that sounds." As Charles tucked the girls into their beds, real beds, in their own room with stuffed animals and books and all the things children should have, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The path hadn't been easy. There had been court dates and social worker visits, financial struggles and sleepless nights filled with worry. There had been moments when he'd wondered if he was doing the right thing, if he was enough for these children who had already been through so much. But love, Charles had learned, wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, day after day, and refusing to give up when things got hard. It was about choosing to see possibility instead of problems, hope instead of obstacles. "Good night, Dad," Anna whispered as he kissed her forehead. "Good night, sweetheart. Sweet dreams." As he turned off the light and closed their door, Charles thought about all the children still out there, waiting for someone to see them, to choose them, to fight for them. The world was full of Mayas and Annas, kids who just needed someone to believe they were worth saving. Maybe Noah was right. Maybe they could help more kids someday. But for now, Charles was content to have given 3 children, including his own son, something precious. The knowledge that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose to love you, protect you, and never let you go. In the end, Charles had learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give is the one you never planned to offer. And sometimes, in saving others, you discover that you've saved yourself too. Christmas was no longer a reminder of how far life had pushed him to the edge. Now, it was a celebration of how far love could pull him back. If this story touched your heart, remember that there are Maya and Annas everywhere, waiting for someone to see their worth. Sometimes the most important choice we make isn't the easiest one, but it's always the one that leads us toward who we're meant to be. Thank you for joining us for this journey. If you believe in the power of love to change lives, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Soul Lift Stories for more stories that remind us what's truly important in life. Stories like Charles's prove that heroes walk among us every day. What's the most selfless act you've ever witnessed? Share your story in the comments below. You might just inspire our next tale.